treat and an educational experience for everyone. We have with us today absolute legend here in Colorado, Philip Cherner. And I can tell you, he may not recall this, but when I got out of the military in 2000, I set up a practice, and there was an issue that came up, and somebody said, you need to call Phil Cherner. And at the time, I didn't really know many people in town, but I got your number and I dialed up and said, hey, I have this question. How should I handle it? And you treated me like we were, colleagues who had practiced for 20 years. And I'll never forget that. And ever since then, throughout the years, I've always remembered that Phil Cherner is an absolute gentleman, and he treats everybody with absolute respect. And I know that from personal experience, and it was absolutely great. So good afternoon and welcome. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. Thank you very much.
All right. So I wanted to talk with you. Obviously, we spoke yesterday somewhat by chance, and I called you back and said, hey, would you like to do our vlog, our podcast, and talk about your career, what you've done? And why don't you just give a quick bio of you? I mean, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school, and how'd you make it to Colorado?
Well, it's not a complicated story. I grew up in Detroit and a couple other Midwestern towns along the way. Went to college in Ann Arbor, went to law school down in the South, and then about 1975, I put my life in a small U-Haul van and drove west, came to Colorado, and been here ever since.
All right. What drew you to, what was the draw to come to Colorado?
Dry air, mountains. Since I had no job, it seemed like a good place to be with no job.
Okay.
If I had the downtime. There's something about Colorado that was sort of a mecca or a legend when I was in college. You could just go off and sit on top of a mountain and chant, or at least that was the theory.
Okay. How'd that turn out for you?
Well, I love it out here. It's everything it was chalked up to be and more. It's really a great place to live.
It is. I'm a native, and I have traveled around. I think I've been to every state but one. I've been around the world, and there's nothing like coming home to Colorado. We have it pretty good here, but it's getting a little crowded.
Yeah. Well, I have to agree with you that flight into DIA when you can finally see your mountains as you come home is spectacular.
So obviously, we talk about legal issues on this vlog and podcast. Tell me about the start of your legal career. I mean, obviously, you've done criminal defense. I know you've done some other things over the years, but how did you get into being a criminal defense attorney? Is it something you always wanted to do, or was it something that just happened?
Sometime in my junior or senior year of college, I decided I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney.
Okay.
Not entirely sure how I got there, but it was the 60s. The judicial branch was the most responsive of the three branches of government, I think. I mean, it's been a long time. And on top of that was the politics of it. I just felt that getting between the government's oppressive behavior and my clients was going to be a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know you probably get the question all the time, or since you've retired or semi-retired here, but you still probably got it throughout the years. How can you represent those people that are so guilty?
Sure. And the most recent comment on that I heard, I forget the doctor's name, but there was a mass shooting at a synagogue a few weeks back, and they brought in the shooter as one of the patients to the ER. And he walked in and introduced himself to the shooter and proceeded to take care of him just like he would of anybody else. And afterwards, he's Jewish. He was asked, how could you do that? And he said, that's what we do. We treat the wounded. And I think in his own way, he said, probably more eloquently than I can, why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Another way to look at it is if I can get a bad guy or a person of disrepute or someone who's obviously guilty a fair shake, if I can get them through the system and get their rights honored, then it's better for all of us. So,
absolutely. And
that's the other half of it, I think.
I totally agree. I mean, I get that all the time. And my mother-in-law was always, any chance you're ever going to become a judge, instead of representing those people? How do you do that? Well, it's easy. It's called defending the Constitution. And when we go in and represent people accused of terrible and bad things, we're not necessarily condoning what they've done, but we're saying we need to protect their rights, because if we allow the government to start railroading guilty people, they'll start doing it to innocent people as well. And we, as attorneys in the courtroom, are the people that stand in between an over-oppressive government trying to exert their power on the individual. When it says the people of the state of Colorado or the United States government versus that person, there's only usually one person standing there on our person's side, and that's us. And I take that job very seriously. And so I have no problem representing those people because I'm defending the Constitution on a daily basis.
Yeah, and the definition of those people is a constantly shifting target. So you never know when you're going to be one of those people.
And, you know, I've had so many people over the years that thought, oh, thought I'd hire somebody like you. And I'm like, well, that's what I'm here for. And you're hiring me because you or your family or friend got in trouble. And, but now all of a sudden those things are no longer technicalities. They're called due process. Mm-hmm. And why is that mandatory sentence in place? Because, you know, little Johnny is different from all those really bad guys. And I said, well, thank the legislature. They're the ones that put in the mandatory minimum. This is what it is. And I understand Johnny's a good kid, but he needs to be treated like everybody else according to the eyes of the law. So we've taken away that discretion. And they, do that. And you've seen that evolve over the years, have you not?
Yeah, and we've all had clients come in and go through that eye-opening experience when they probably didn't give criminal justice issues much thought when they went to the ballot box, but suddenly their loved one or their brother or whatever is in trouble, and it takes on a whole new meaning. And then they ask themselves, how did we get to this point?
Yeah. Throughout your career, I mean, tell me about how you got started as a public defender.
Oh, interesting. Well, I applied when I first moved out here in 1975. I didn't get hired. I opened my own practice, did that for a couple years, and it was a little lean in the first few months. I actually had a second job working as a mechanic. Finally, I was able to turn over enough business that I could just concentrate on being a lawyer. I did that for about 5 years. In the last couple of years, I got a call occasionally from the public defenders saying, we're kind of thin. We're looking for people who have some experience. Are you interested? And I'd say, well, I've put this practice together. If I join you, someday I'll probably leave and have to start all over again in the private world. And I don't know that I really want to do that twice. And then it dawned on me after some more persuasive calls that the best way to be a good trial lawyer is to get in there at the center of the action and try cases. And the only way you're going to do that is to be a prosecutor or a defense lawyer. And so I changed my mind, signed up, and I was a PD for 8 years.
Wow. I totally agree with you. I mean, I've said this before, and some people don't necessarily like it, but I'm of the mindset that anybody can be a lawyer. Just about anybody can be a litigator in the sense of like civil stuff. They go back and file paperwork, but not everybody can be a trial attorney. Do you agree with that?
Well, I suppose that's true. I mean, even most lawyers aren't trial attorneys, let alone most people. We are a small fraction of the legal community, but it's a special combination of skills between the oral, the quick thinking on your feet, the ability to stand up to power and say no or I object or hell no, or however you do it, as well as the scholarly side of it and the need to be able to research and write. So, yeah, it is a combination that's unusual.
Do you remember your first trial?
Yeah, it was a red light violation. No, a stop sign violation.
Yeah?
A stop sign violation. A friend of mine said, I did not run this stop sign. Will you defend me? And I thought, sure. So I represented him, and we got a hung jury.
All right.
But I can still take you back to where that courtroom is. I know who the judge was. I don't know that I remember who the prosecutor was. But it's all pretty vivid all these years later.
It's a memorable experience. There's nothing like getting up and getting in front of that jury and having that judge and looking at you and kind of looking at you weird. And then by the end of the trial, like, looks like they're competent. You can come back here again, kind of thing.
Yeah, it was something like that, right?
What made you decide to leave the public defender's office?
I'd been there 8 years. I'd tried probably 80 felony trials in those 8, about 10 a year. and it just seemed like it was time to try something different. I think I'd gotten a ton out of it. I mean, really, I thought I knew. I think I knew a lot, and I thought I knew more than I did.
Yeah.
Because it actually took me about 20 years into the practice until I felt like I really understood what I was doing, until I sort of peaked. But at that point, I wanted to try some different things. I also wanted to dip a little into politics or advocacy, community work, and you can't do that as a state employee. Plus, you don't have the time. So
Sure.
when I saw an opportunity to leave and try to do something different while still being a trial lawyer, still pursuing those goals, I jumped on it.
Colorado has one of the first and probably the best public defender systems in the United States. That's my opinion, and I don't think that I'm the only one that holds that opinion. Public defenders get kind of a bum rap, don't they?
Well, yes and no. I think there's a community of defendants that feels that you can't represent them because you're not a true capitalist. You're getting paid by the government instead of by the client. Mm-hmm. And somehow you're going to be a bureaucrat and just do as much as you need to do to show up at work at 8 in the morning and be home at 8 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the evening. To which I would say, yeah, I wish. to myself and my colleagues who worked 6 and 7 days a week for years. So, yeah, there was that undercurrent of you're just processing me. The client speech would sometimes include something like, well, you're getting paid by the same people that are paying the prosecutor. And although that's not literally true, it didn't matter. And you wrestle with that with some clients. And the way I dealt with it was to accept their viewpoint and then go out and try to prove them wrong.
Yeah. I still do indigent defense, both in the state and federal system. And, they sometimes say, well, you're getting paid by the same person. I'm like, well, okay, but I'm here. I don't care if I bring down the entire state of Colorado. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do that. And same thing when I was in the military. They're like, well, you're getting paid by the same people. I'm like, no, I don't care if the entire Marine Corps disappears. If I zealously represent you, so be it. My loyalty is to you, not anybody else. And like I said, some of the best trial attorneys I've ever seen have been public defenders. And, some of the worst attorneys I've ever seen have been private counsel. I mean, it doesn't matter. You need somebody with that experience. And clearly, as a public defender or district attorney, you're going to get that experience by trying cases. I don't think people realize when you say you're doing 10 to 12 felony trials a year, how hard that is. In the meantime, carrying a caseload of 60, 70, 100 cases and preparing, investigating, and doing that work, you're not exactly working 8 to 5.
No. No, we didn't. No, there were lots of Sunday nights at the jail and Saturday mornings going through files and meeting with witnesses after hours during the week because that was more convenient for them and so forth.
Yeah. I know growing up that my children were, they knew the difference between prison and county jail because I would, be with the wife. Like, we're going to go to this as a family. But first, I need to go talk to this client over here in jail. Dad, what's the difference? People just don't get that it's a literally 7-day-a-week job, and how do you turn it off? If you have a case you're thinking about, you go to a movie not to think about it, and it's hard to turn off. Do you ever have that problem or had that problem?
It would be easier to identify this short periods of time where I didn't have that problem. Yeah, and I don't know if it was a problem or maybe it's a benefit from the client perspective. I don't think any of the good trial lawyers ever stop thinking about their cases.
Yeah, I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night and jot things down that I think about. It just never stops. Yeah. But I think that's a sign, like I said, of a good attorney. So you said you wanted to get more into the political or advocacy, all right? And I know that you are passionate about the death penalty or getting rid of it. And I know you're, when I asked you to give you a bio, you were very humble. You've won many awards. You have been given awards regarding your advocacy to abolish the death penalty. The Jonathan Olem Award, which here in Colorado, that's the criminal defense bar equivalent of, I mean, it's the highest award I think we can get. I think it's the most honored award out there. Everybody knows about it. If you're a criminal defense attorney, people go to the dinner, and you sit there in awe at the people that have done it and just think, wow, that guy took my phone call 20 years ago when I was a young attorney. It was, it's so congratulations on that. I know you won other things as well, but how did you get into, abolishing the death penalty? How did that start?
I can't really put my finger on the when. I grew up in a state where they don't have a death penalty, in Michigan.
Okay.
At some point during my criminal defense journey, I became increasingly exposed to the almost bizarreness of the cruelty of the death penalty, and I slowly started to act on the feelings that I'd always had, that it just made no sense. And it's worse than making no sense. It arises from a racist history of this country, and it is wasteful, it's unsuccessful, it's random, it's cruel, doesn't address any of the issues that it supposedly addresses or attacks. I got a call from the Alternate Defense Council once, the fellow that funds the indigent defense for non-public defender cases, and he said...
Was this Brian Sheehy, the infamous Brian Sheehy was the one who gave me my start. Within 2 weeks of starting my practice, he said, hey, you want to do a retrial of attempted murder as a co-chair? And I've just, got out, started my own practice. Sure. And I to this day, I will always be thankful for Brian Sheehy to, get me started. And as of January 1st, it'll be 19 years in private practice.
Well, there you go. He had an impact on me through 2 phone calls. The first was, we're looking for somebody to learn the ins and outs of DNA chemistry and the testing and how it gets used in the courtroom and how courts admit or refuse to admit scientific evidence. And it doesn't pay for us to train one person on every death penalty defense team, so we want one person who can go from team to team and bring that expertise. So I signed up for that, and because of that, I was involved in a whole host of death penalty cases, although as a sort of a backbencher. I did appear in front of a couple juries, but most of my work was motions practice and teaching the frontline lawyers what they needed to know to deal with it in front of the jury. The second phone call was several years later, and he called and said, we have this one homicide case, the one where the guy got the death penalty. And I said, yeah, because we all knew what he was talking about. He said, we're going to need a lawyer to do the post-conviction work on that. Are you interested in doing it? And I said, sure. And then for the next 15 years, I had that case around my neck. So thank you, Brian. Brian was actually a great friend and a great lawyer, and I was honored that he would pick me. But at the time, I had no idea I was signing up for a life-changing event.
Yeah, well, I would like I said, for a career doing criminal defense, I did it when I was in the Marine Corps, and Brian was a former Marine pilot, Vietnam, went to law school afterwards, and David Kaplan was one of my criminal law professors in law school, and I called him up after I was getting out. I said, hey, anything I could do, anyone I should talk to? He said, give Brian a call. And Brian said, give me a call when you get in town. And I think we met maybe 10 minutes. He said, you're good to go. We'll see you. And so I appreciate that. He helped me fulfill my promise, because I told my wife I had, give me 3 months, and if I can't make it on my own, I'll go get a job. And like I said, 19 years later, here I am.
There you go.
So how many death penalty cases have you been involved with in your career?
Well, it's funny. The first one I was involved in as a witness because I was one of the first lawyers to contact Frank Rodriguez after he was arrested. This was in the early 80s. So I guess that was the first one I was involved in. Obviously, I didn't do any lawyering in that. Let's see. There's probably 10, 12 after that where I was doing either the DNA work or cooperating on other things or brought in as an expert witness to testify about some such.
Okay.
And fortunately now there's only a couple cases pending at the trial level and 2 on appeal. So the number of cases has dropped significantly.
Did you see that Adams County just decided they were going to go death on the case where the gentleman shot the police officer?
Yeah, I did. I don't know enough about the history of the defendant or the case. The best I could tell is the defendant had 1 or 2 prior felony convictions. The officer being a victim is, I think, automatically an aggravator. But I don't know what their chances are. I do know we haven't had a jury reach a verdict of death in 9 years. So good luck.
And that's kind of the way I've thought about it. I think that most people look at it that although it's on the books, I don't see if it being used again in Colorado. The governor-elect has said that he's not for it. He's not for it. And then I want to talk about you and Governor Hickenlooper, because I think you and your work may have been the man that changed his mind on the death penalty. So, I don't think effectively we have that. And then there's talk about the legislature maybe abolishing the death penalty this legislative session. And that's, the will of the people. So let me ask you about that. There's a case in Colorado. It's notorious. What was it, 1987 was the Dunlap shooting case?
It was 25 years ago this month.
Okay.
1993.
1993. That's why I remember it, because I was in law school. And, it was talked about. It was a big deal, was it not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was right after the supposed summer of violence. And in some ways, it was a culmination of all the hysterical press that had gone on a good part of the year.
Could you give just a quick summary of the facts of the case? It's known as the Chuck E. Cheese homicide, right?
Right. Mr. Dunlap was a former employee of a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant in Aurora, and he went in, stayed after the place closed. I think he hid inside a bathroom, if I remember right, and then shot and killed 4 employees and wounded a 5th.
Okay.
And was arrested within 48 hours. Case went to trial about 2.5 years later.
And ultimately, the death penalty was imposed.
That's correct. There was a jury verdict of death. Right.
How did you get involved in that particular case? I know you weren't on the trial team. You were post-conviction, or were you post-conviction?
Well, that was the second call from Brian, where Brian said, can you do the post-conviction work? Which means once the direct appeal was finished in the Colorado Supreme Court, somebody needed to come back and do all the post-conviction litigation, and I got tabbed to put a team together to start on that.
Okay. And just for the people that are listening that may not be familiar with that term, post-conviction, like you said, basically, if you lose the trial level, you go to the Court of Appeals, then you go to the Supreme Court here in the state of Colorado, and then after that, post-conviction is to go back and try to determine if there was some evidence that is now available that may have brought about a different result, or whether the attorney's performance in that case was deficient.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so obviously, once you get the call, you don't have any time limits in that particular case, and since it's a death penalty case, but obviously you're working under the time limits of they want to kill the client.
Right.
Just go ahead and explain kind of that process of how it worked and where it ultimately ended up here.
Well, the first thing I did was get on the phone and get some other people to help me. And it's important to remember that saving Mr. Dunlap's life was the effort of many, many, many people. I was the team leader in that particular stage we've talked about, but other people worked very hard, and we wouldn't have achieved that result without all their work.
How many people did you have on your team?
I think there were 3 of us. There were lawyers, and a couple of investigators and a mitigation specialist. So I'm thinking it was 6 or 7 of us. My admin was fully engaged as well.
It's basically a full-time job, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a year where I didn't take anything else. That was it. We cleared the deck and off we went. And we did that through the state court process for many years, and then the case was over in state court, but you're allowed to go to federal court. And that, by the way, triggers a deadline. Since we were aware of that deadline from the beginning, excuse me, there was, in fact, a looming deadline that we had to meet.
And that's the habeas process?
The 1-year deadline with a bunch of exceptions. Excuse me. So then the case went over to federal court. The federal public defender got involved. They took over the litigation for the federal habeas corpus process, which consumed another few years.
And that's a specialty in and of itself almost, isn't it?
Yes, and they did a very good job. And they brought me on as sort of institutional memory, and in addition to work on the Clemency, which, if the litigation failed, was going to be the next step. So I moved into primarily working on the Clemency side of it.
Okay.
And those of us on the team put together a massive Clemency petition, and the governor didn't quite grant it, but he did grant an indefinite reprieve, which effectively halted the execution process a few months before it was supposed to take place, and it's been in effect now for about 5.5 years.
Okay. There are a couple of terms you talked about. Mitigation specialist. What's a mitigation specialist in the death penalty terms, or in just any type of case, any serious felony type of case?
In any case, a judge at sentencing is going to be looking at the crime and also the offender. As for the crime, they're going to look. It's particularly how aggravating it is, how many people were hurt, if any, how badly were they hurt, how much was taken if it's a monetary crime, how premeditated was it. On the mitigation side, almost anything can be mitigating, and things like the defendant's mental health, his upbringing, his education, what he suffered or didn't suffer as a child at the hands of his siblings and parents. Any kind of thing that would explain or tend to lessen the impact of his culpability. Most particularly, anything that's genetic, because if it's genetic, by definition, it's not your fault. You
Sure.
can't control how you were born. But your childhood environment is almost the same because you have so little control over that. So we bring in someone who is specially trained to be able to understand the environment in which the person grew from birth on the way up. And they actually start looking at 2 generations back and then looking to see how that affected the defendant. And it's a combination of sociology and mental health and the rest of it. And their job is primarily one of fact gathering, so that we can feed the information they pull to experts, whether they're psychologists, psychiatrists, MDs, doctors with expertise in brain disease, whatever seems appropriate. And so they are a vital first step in assembling the mitigating information.
Okay. And like you said, that's the most important part in just about any case. Would you agree?
Well, assuming that the government can prove guilt, and they generally don't seek the death penalty unless they've got an airtight case on guilt, then you're looking for ways to mitigate the damage and mitigate the case. So yeah, it can quickly rise to the most important thing. Although, of course, when you first walk in, you don't want to prejudge it.
That's true.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there'll be people that will watch this and they'll be saying, oh, it doesn't matter. I don't care how somebody grew up, or that's just an excuse, total BS. I had it pretty rough and I turned out okay. What do you say to arguments like that? Because, doing what we do, I've seen it. I used to. I'll tell you, when I first started, that doesn't matter. But when you have people that literally grew up not just poor, but abused, sexually beaten. I mean, just beaten like a dog, so to speak. That stuff affects people. And as I've gotten older, I've realized my own, looking back, things I do, it affects me because of what happened when I was a kid. Not that I was a beaten or anything like that, but just interaction with people or the way your parents acted with you. It affects you. It really does. And I used to be kind of dismissive of that, but as I've gotten older, I think it does matter. I mean, what do you tell people when they bring that up? That, it doesn't matter. I turned out just fine.
Well, this is a common fact pattern. You got a 10, 12, 13-year-old kid who doesn't have any outward appearances of being difficult. He's not committing crimes. He goes to school when he's supposed to. He's not difficult with his parents. And 6, 7 years later, he's facing a death penalty prosecution because somewhere between age, say, 13 and 19, he lost it. Why? I mean, the why is everything.
Yeah. What happened?
That's right. And in a regular felony case, the penalties are often automatic, or if not automatic, the bottom is so heinous that it might as well be automatic. You can't save your client from it. Excuse me. But And even in a first-degree murder that's not a death case, the penalty is automatic. You get life without parole. So mitigation is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter, in the courtroom anyway. In a death penalty case, you not only get to present all your mitigation at the sentencing, because it does matter. It's how the jury decides life and death. But you get to present it to a jury of 12 of your fellow citizens, not a judge. And so mitigation not only becomes admissible and useful, it becomes the ballgame. It becomes so critical. Many, many death cases, the defendants would plead guilty to a life sentence if the government would just walk away from death. So the whole process is really just a fight about this binary decision at sentencing. Is it life or is it death?
Yeah. You mentioned that when you do mitigation, the mental health records go back, school, education, things like that. In the course of your career, not only just in death penalty cases, but practicing in general, what percentage do you think of the defendants either had diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health issues by the time the file got to your desk?
Most.
Yeah.
I don't know about a number, but more than half.
Yeah. And that's my experience as well.
Right. And I would have to say, too, that, I think a lot of the general population that doesn't find its way into the system probably suffers from difficulties as well. It's not that the mental health problem drives them into the criminal justice system. It's that they get unlucky enough, in part because of the mental health problems, to find their way into the criminal justice system. There's a certain randomness to the way you get brought into the system that beyond just your own behavior.
Yeah. I was in court one day, and there was a gentleman that the public defenders had, but he was in custody, and it was a change of address. He was on parole, but he messed up, and he was going back. But what it turned out to be, and it just drove the judge absolutely insane, like, why are we doing this? But he had mental health issues. He was schizophrenic, and he had medications and things like that. And the cost of the medication came up, and it was like $200 per month. But they ran out of money to pay the $200 per month, so he didn't take his meds, which of course reverted back to behavior and ultimately wound up getting arrested and assaultive to somebody. Not condoning, but that explains it, why it happened, mitigation. And so they have to send him to prison, and they're going to cost $32,000 a year to house, feed, and basically warehouse this individual, not give him the medications while there. They'll give him another 30 days when he gets out on parole, but it doesn't solve the problem. And that's my frustration when we have people like some people deserve punishment. Not everybody is, there's some people that need to be punished to help change that behavior. But most of the people that have the mental health issues is like, let's find out, what are they doing? Are they self-medicating? Do they have mental health that can be controlled by medication? It just is so frustrating to me when there's a much smarter, evidence-based, and economically, financially responsible way to do it. And I'm not saying, everybody needs to go free, because that's not going to happen inside. I'm a realist, but it's just frustrating in that regard.
Quite is, yes.
So let's talk about the Dunlap case some more, all right? Sorry I got sidetracked on that, but that's the way my mind thinks some days. And so you go through the appellate process for Mr. Dunlap. You go through the habeas process in federal court, which is after all the things have been all the potential remedies have been exhausted. You go to the federal court, and all that's sustained. At that point, then you go to the clemency process. Okay,
right.
And for the clemency process, correct me if I'm wrong, but that goes back to the power of the king. He could say, "Yep, the court found you guilty, but I'm going to give you clemency. Instead of a 10-year sentence, I'm going to give you a 2-year sentence, or I'm going to pardon you." That's the power of the king, and our executive branches still have that to this day. The governor can grant pardons, can grant clemencies. The president can do that as well.
Right.
Tell me about this package that you submitted to the governor, because the governor stated when he granted clemency for Mr. Dunlap that his views had evolved. Because when he ran for governor, his first term, he said he was for the death penalty. And I've known some people that have worked for him, and they said that he is a reader, and all those clemency packages, whether it's the guy that got the dope conviction 20 years ago or a theft or whatever, he reads each and every one of those individually himself. So obviously he read what you had to say on behalf of Mr. Dunlap. Tell me about it. What did you put in there?
Well, everything we could think of is what we put in there. I mean, wasn't quite literally the kitchen sink, but that was our mentality. We were aware that there's only been one execution in Colorado since 1967, and that one itself was in 98. So it's not like Colorado has this love affair with the death penalty. So part of our presentation was that the death penalty is just wrong, even though it remains on the books. The chances of getting a death penalty verdict are something like less than 1 in 1,000 or something of the people prosecuted for homicides. It's just a tiny, tiny fraction of defendants that make it into that funnel. So it's inherently arbitrary to begin with. We also had a compelling explanation for our client's conduct and how the case ripened into a death penalty case. And we presented all that to the governor as well. We gave him a binder that was several inches thick with a petition and various attachments. We had letters from former judges, letters from various community groups, religious groups, political organizations. And all that was presented to him. Also, to his credit, he met with us for 2 or 3 hours one morning, which, if you're familiar with his schedule, is remarkable.
I don't think he has 2 or 3 hours.
Right. But it was not just that. That was something like the tip of the iceberg. He met, as far as I know, with the victim families, with the prosecutors for at least as much time as he spent with us. He read our submission. The government or the prosecutor submitted a counter submission, and we submitted a reply. And he had all that material. His staff worked very hard to gather information for him and do additional outreach. If you watch the tape of him announcing the reprieve, you can see the agony on his face where he is torn between the obvious discomfort he felt because of what his announcement was going to do to the victim community. Although
Sure.
they weren't unanimous by any means, but he knew he was disappointing some people, and at the same time, you could see he was terribly uncomfortable with the idea of killing someone, and he viewed a refusal to grant a reprieve as killing someone.
Sure.
He wasn't hiding. He's not a lawyer. He wasn't hiding behind any lawyerly explanation for why it was okay to do it, because, well, the jury said it was okay, and the judges have said it's okay, so who am I to get in the way?
Sure. A lot of judges or a lot of governors do that these days when confronted with that kind of decision that needs to be made. I mean,
It's a moral dodge, and he did not dodge the morality of this. He took it head on, and that's to his credit.
Yeah. Because that's not a very, well, I guess back then, I mean, at the time, it was probably not a political thing to do that was going to, favor him. I think he took a lot of heat for it at the time. I mean, I recall seeing it, and it's like, wow, don't see that very often. And so, obviously, it doesn't happen very often. So you all and your team, did an amazing job. And I know he'd said that his position had evolved over the years, but I don't think I'm jumping too far ahead by saying that you and your team had something to do with that, and it made him think long and hard, because it is the ultimate decision. And, you must have been very gratified by that. I mean, he didn't grant complete clemency in the sense that the death penalty is completely off the table. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, he should have granted a clemency and just brought this to an end. He actually made the decision, which he said at the time was probably the worst of the three options in terms of politics, because it offended both sides and didn't put the issue away.
Sure.
And I think he should have gone the extra mile and brought this to an end. Now, as we sit here in early December with another governor taking over in about 30 days, we still don't know where this is heading. I don't know if Governor Hickenlooper will act or not. The odds are that he won't, I suppose. And then the next governor will have to deal with it.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you. Can you look into the crystal ball, and can you tell if the governor will do something on his way out the door, or do you think perhaps his presidential aspirations may put that on hold?
I don't know.
No idea.
I really don't know what's going to happen over the next 30.
Okay. Has anybody reached out to you from the governor's office?
Well, I'm not Mr. Dunlap's lawyer anymore since I retired. So
Okay.
if they're reaching out, they wouldn't be reaching out to me.
They wouldn't be reaching out to you. Right. All right. I know you've got to get going here, but just a couple more questions. So what do you tell people? Like I said, we hear, how do you represent those people? But, and they say, well, read the Constitution. It says the government can take your life, liberty, or property as long as they give you due process. The argument that the governors make, well, the courts found it was okay. The judge said it was okay. The jury went along with it. Who am I to prevent justice? What do you tell people about that? I mean, is it a...
I'm not presenting justice. I am ensuring it. It's just the opposite, and that's easy. That's the philosophical explanation. It's an adversary system, both sides need to make powerful arguments and let the decision maker in the middle come up with the answer. So it doesn't work if only one side pushes, and as you know, they push. But the more practical answer is most of the time our work isn't about guilt and innocence. It's about the sentence.
Yeah.
And when people say to me, so how many innocent people or how many guilty guys did you get off? That's a minuscule number. I can proudly say, no, that's not the right question. The right question is, how many people did I help get a fair sentence, even though they were guilty? Because if I hadn't done my job, they would have gotten a lot more time, and that would have been an unfair and unjust result.
Absolutely. I mean, our legal system is founded on the principle that, it's better to let 10 guilty men go free than one innocent person be convicted. And, we're talking about somebody's liberty here. How do you don't give them that time back if they spend 10, 20 years in custody. And like you said, it's not justice if somebody gets one more day incarcerated than they properly deserve, and nobody thinks about it until it's their family member, their friend, their kid. Nobody thinks about it. They don't care. It's all fine. Let the legislature take care of it. So what are you doing now advocating for the abolition of the death penalty? What organizations are you involved with? And
I chair the board of directors of Coloradans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Our mission is dedicated to repealing the death penalty in Colorado. I'm also on the board of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar that shares in that mission. And we hope that in this legislative session, we will get a bill introduced to repeal the death penalty. The governor has said if it gets to his desk, he'll sign it. We're optimistic that the makeup of the General Assembly is such that we can get a bill to his desk.
Okay. Let me ask you one more question before
Sure.
you go, because I know we're running out of time here. As an attorney, do you have an attorney that you just thought was your hero, or you wanted to be just like them throughout your career? You just thought, man, I wish I was like that.
There's a handful of people I really admire, but the one who comes to mind, because I worked closely with him in one big case, was Walter Reisch.
Yep.
And Walter never stopped pushing. We were doing this case together, and the phone would ring at all hours of the day and night, 7 days a week, with Walter having some idea. And it was always worth pursuing. I am so glad he made those phone calls.
And for those that don't know, Walter Reisch is an absolute legend in the state of Colorado. I got the privilege of I had some witnesses in a case that he was trying in federal court over the years and some peripheral contact with him, but he is an absolute legend. And in fact, I have a signed copy of his book, Murder in the Vault, over here on my bookshelf because, he's a legend. And to get to spend even just a few minutes with him was absolutely amazing. He's just an interesting guy, and like you said, he didn't the tenacity of just pursuing justice and just being a great trial lawyer is fabulous.
It wasn't just that. He was totally committed to the cause. And he viewed every client as the victim of an oppressive governmental action, and he responded accordingly. There was no gray for Walter when he was out there trying cases, and it's something I never forgot.
All right. Appreciate everything that you do, continue to do. Thank you for taking my phone call some 20 years ago. I know you were like I said, you have a reputation as not only as a great trial lawyer, but as the guy to go to if there's an ethical question or issue that had to be answered. You were that guy, and I'm sure you know this already, but you are so admired and well respected in the Colorado and Denver Bar Association. I just say thank you. So I appreciate you coming here today, and enjoy retirement.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. All right.